All right, let me get to this before we take a break. Australia, a state in Australia, is testing a new app that would help the government track residents to ensure that they are obeying their COVID-19 orders. We mentioned Australia earlier in the program that they had finally decided, zero COVID is actually not a great policy. It is actually not sustainable. And I guess we can't do it anymore. But that doesn't mean that they have come back to sanity, because this is the government of South Australia.
Yeah, Adelaide.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So it is a trial of home quarantine SA. So you download an app on your cell phone. It features facial recognition and geolocation, and the government is gonna randomly contact you to check if you are at an approved quarantine location, and you better respond within 15 minutes and take a photo of your face. If not, the police is gonna come check up on you.
Well, I mean,
we're in 1984, guys.
I think you've had me kick off on this show so many times about Australia. This will be no exception. I don't know why anyone's surprised. We've been heading in this direction for a long time. That's why I got out of the country. I feel so sad for Australians who are participating in all of this, because what Americans don't seem to understand is that this intrinsic, inbuilt sense of liberty does not exist in Australia. Aussies, being that they are, in fact, in my opinion, some of the coolest, nicest, most wonderful people in the world, still are very much just like, she'll be right. Well, she won't be right, guys. Now you got to take a picture of your bloody face and send it to the government. So how's that working out for you?
Do you have any family in that particular?
Oh no, not in South Australia, because South Australia is not even that bad. That's what's remarkable about this. Is my family is in Victoria. Which is the socialist republic
really
of Victoria.
Oh.
I mean, and it's horrible. I spoke to my brother last night because I call him quite frequently now just to check in, see how they're doing, because it's very depressing for them. And he was saying to me that my mom, my brother, and my brother's fiance are all on board with moving to the US. They're done. They're like, we want out. This is not going to get any better. They see the writing on the wall, like I did 2 years ago, fam. My dad is the only one who will not move, and it's really sad listening to my dad justify why, because I think he even feels like he's watching his country just fall off the face of the planet. And I wish Aussies would get louder and more aggressive about this, because I don't think that they realize that the government does not hand down their freedoms to them.
Right.
A lot of these freedoms are intrinsic human rights that you just are born with.
Yeah. By the way, don't give up your guns to the government. Just as a...
Or just don't have a freaking list of prohibited weapons that goes on for millennia.
Right.
Mace, pepper spray, any of this. Like, the police will protect you.
It's not working out well for you guys right now in 2021, Rob.
And, you go that list, and then in the UK, they, are excited because they took spoons away from people when they have the cutlery. Do you have that? Do you have that? Like the cutlery boxes, you can get rid of your dangerous cutlery, and then the UK police show a bunch of stuff, and there's a spoon. But it's the difference between being a citizen.
God, someone's finally doing it.
It's the difference between being a citizen and a subject.
Yes, that's actually that's a great point. Because I think people forget too that Australia is, in fact, and I always make this point, that part of the reason why Australia is so jacked is because it has such a strong relationship to the United Kingdom, and we see how that's going.
Right.
And the Queen is our head of state. I mean, Australia is not an autonomous nation. It's very much entrenched in this, I hate to say it, but penal colony attitude that everyone makes fun of. But in reality, the government is still subservient in a lot of ways to the Brits.
Well, and China. So.
And China.
Yeah, and China.
Very much China, especially where I'm from. The premier, we call them premiers, not governors, he is very much in bed with China.
And the Chinese government is paying for elections in both New Zealand and Australia. They're literally in the election process.
Yes.
And this app thing seems like a really good test run that when China does it, they can say, well, Australia's doing it too.
Did you guys see that story yesterday, speaking about Australia, of that little boy who was stopped from basically going back to his parents across the border in New South Wales? Did you see that?
No.
Yeah, little boy was effectively, he was in New South Wales, I believe, and wanted to go back to his family in Queensland, and wasn't able to go over because of COVID restrictions. So yet again, separating people, ruining families. Then the government walked it back because people got pissed.
But it's just interesting to me. This whole COVID thing has been the hubris of man. We've thought that we could stop COVID. If you look at Israel right now, the most vaccinated country in the world, they have a mask mandate. And they have the highest COVID numbers that they've ever had. Their 7-day average, according to Worldometer, is over 9,000. They peaked at about 8,700 in the last wave. So
Which I feel like is not what you want when you have a vaccine.
Yeah. You know, I have both vaccines. I've got diabetes. It was smart for me to do. Now they want me to get a third one. I'm sorry, my vaccine doesn't seem to be working.
Right.
I've got 90% of the people that I know that have gotten COVID in the past month have been vaccinated. And some of them went into the hospital. And are close to being put on ventilators even though they had the vaccine. There is no plan to stop COVID because the mitigation methods don't work. I've said it from the beginning. The way out of COVID is through COVID. Every mitigation that they stop, you're seeing it in Australia. Australia finally said, well, you know, we can't have zero COVID. That's right, because as soon as you open up, it's going to run through your population because that's what a virus does.
Right. Yeah. Sydney, he mentioned Australia. I feel the need to give you a rebuttal.
Like, Sydney, go mad. No, I completely agree. I think that I was actually just sitting here listening going, tell me more. Like, no, you summed it up beautifully. You know, at the end of the day, I think that when we talk about herd immunity, and that's become almost like a dirty word by today's standards now, I think that this is a thing, and you're precisely right when it comes to countries like Australia and New Zealand that closed their borders super early on, and then basically decided that they were going to try to achieve this zero COVID infections and deaths thing, which, you know, that's a really nice fantasy, but that's not the reality that we live in. And I think that when they eventually do go to open their borders, you know, in 15,000 years, they won't ever be able to let people into the country, because what are you going to do? You're going to keep sending people to quarantine facilities for the rest of their days?
It's like Native Americans and smallpox.
Yeah. And we do have a kind of an update of what's going on in Australia later in the program, but you know, you mentioned herd immunity, and I do find it fascinating that now in 2020 and 2021, they seem to be trying to rewrite history as if herd immunity can only be achieved through vaccination and not through natural immunity, when if you look back at the whole reason for the theory of herd immunity, it was formed through natural immunity. And now all of a sudden they're like, well, herd immunity, get vaccinated, with no regard to the idea of natural immunity being superior as it always has been.
I mean, we only figured that out like 75 YBC years before COVID.
That's true. That's a great point.
And we're now like in year one AC after COVID.
Yeah,
and it's different. But you talk about it, right? And we've talked about Sweden over and over and over and over again. And people, when you bring up Sweden, bring up the death count and go, well, they have more deaths than people around them. I'm like, look at the Delta variant. Look at the countries around them and look at Sweden. Sweden is not getting the new cases that all the countries around them are getting. I am convinced that at the end of this in 2055, when we finally get through this,
depressing.
The same number of people as per capita are going to be dead in every country until we reach natural herd immunity. It is the hubris of man to think that an untried before vaccine technique, mRNA vaccines seem to work, you know, for a short period of time, but they've never been used before.
And
if you say that, that's misinformation. I've got the Facebook thing like came right up here. Press here for COVID information.
Right, but then can you even call it a vaccine? Because the idea of a vaccine has always been that you won't get it. Not that it will just make it less severe.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And then you don't want to talk about therapeutics and you know the I words that we're not allowed to say.
Don't even get me started on